All right, people have popped in, so we'll get going. Hello, everybody. I'm Michael Ettlinger. I direct the Carsey School of Public Policy here at the University of New Hampshire. We're here to talk about the Carsey School's master's degree programs and specifically about the importance of communications in public policy and administration and how that fits into our curriculum. And with us, we have Kristen Grimm, the president of Spitfire Strategies. But before I get to Kristen, I'll say a few words about the Carsey School master's programs. We have three: a master's in public policy, a master's in public administration, and a master's in community development. The overall quality of these programs is excellent, but I'll just say that what makes our programs distinctive is that they really are aimed at providing students what they need to hit the ground running as they start their careers, or for those who are in the program's mid-career. We really focus on very practical, applicable skills and knowledge. I'd also say just that sort of fits in with the Carsey School philosophy more generally. We do research here, we do work in the community, and all of that is aimed at being, actionable, practical, and having real utility in a very tangible way. So there's lots of information on the website about the master's program, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. There's dual degrees, there's supplemental graduate certificates. You can find out about the curriculum and costs and timing and all that sort of thing. I will just say, though, that if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to email us or to, we're happy to get on the phone with you as well if anything comes up. And if you do have any questions about anything, about the programs or about anything we're talking about today, feel free to just pop them into the chat or the Q&A feature in Zoom, and we'll make every effort to get to them. I mentioned that our programs are really meant to be very practical. When we launched the school, one of the things that was important to us was that we address the importance of communications in public policy and public administration. I worked in advocacy and think tanks for many years, and central to the work we did was communications. And even for people who don't end up in their careers being communicators, having an understanding of communication strategy and practice is really important, because in the end, if you're doing if you're number crunching, your numbers are going to get communicated, or they're going to be used by communicators. So we feel it's a very important part of our curriculum. So we have excellent classes in how to analyze programs, sort of the analytics side, the management side, the things that lots of schools of public policy do. But we really also have this additional focus and make sure that our students come out well-grounded in communications. And when we started to think about communications classes, the first person I thought of was Kristen Grimm. I met Kristen quite a while ago at this point, when I don't even remember what job I had or why, but I was a participant in a training Kristen was doing on communications. And I do remember distinctly sitting around at a conference room table with Kristen up front and thinking, wow, this really makes sense. It was the most clear and organized and sort of practical and usable communications training I'd ever experienced. Sort of understanding how it interacts with overall strategy. And it was really good. It was also super engaging and enjoyable. So I really thought of Kristen when we were launching the school, and we'd kept in touch over the years, but when she did that training, I don't know, that was just at the start of her founding Spitfire Strategies. And I probably had a couple of employees, I don't know. And now, she has 50 something employees and has all these big time clients. She's very fancy now. And so I didn't know if she'd be willing to teach for us, but we I went to her office in Washington and she agreed. So it's been awesome. It's great to have her with us and doing this. And I'll say we do have other communications classes in the program, but this is the one that's most kind of focused on the strategic, really strategically using communications to try to achieve goals in public policy and working in public administration and community development. So with that, welcome President Grimm.
Down to that.
So just to get started, I don't know, tell us the story of your life, or at least the part where you got into the work you do.
Sure. Well, I think like probably a lot of students that actually end up coming to the program, I had gone to Smith College, not too far from UNH, and I was supposed to go to law school, and I actually decided not to go to law school, even though I was accepted, and my father declared me unemployable as an Irish history major. And I drove down to Washington, and I actually ended up becoming an intern for what was a public interest communication company. And I had no idea what PR was, and I didn't know that you could do it in the public interest or not in the public interest. And they were just finishing up Nelson Mandela's stadium tour. When Nelson Mandela got out of jail, he came over here and talked about all of the issues around apartheid. And I got hooked, and I stayed there, and I eventually became the president of that company. And what it really taught me, though, was this idea that there were people who, in addition to all the policy people that were running around Washington, D.C. and in state capitals, that there were actually people who decided, what were the priorities we even wanted to discuss? What was going to be on front pages and home pages, and what was going to have a Twitter. And I got really interested in that and thinking that, that's a really interesting part of policy and policy making. And I had big dreams of making the world a better place. I still do. And I realized that there was actually a talent to it, because if you can't get attention, you can't actually get the change that you want, because you don't even get a decision, or you don't even get the meetings to discuss your solution. So I learned that craft over time and eventually started my own company. And we only work on public interest issues. So it's a joy to come to class and talk to students who have a lot of different ideas, from mental health to making sure that people don't go hungry, to thinking about the environment. Some people are thinking about public transit around New Hampshire. And suddenly they realize in class that you can actually call people up and ask, like, why isn't this happening now? And really realize that, in addition to these are campaigns we're just doing in class for a grade, is like, we could actually run this campaign. And it's a really empowering moment to realize that you can actually shape the world in the way that you see it if you use communication well.
So when did you found Spitfire? When did you take that leap?
2002, I started Spitfire. Yeah.
And maybe you could give us some, you sort of gave us some New Hampshire examples, but could you tell us, I don't know, some stories about, I still remember stories from that training you gave me, actually, but which was like.
I have a lot of stories.
Yeah. Just like some examples of the kind of work your firm does.
Sure. So as a strategic communication firm, a lot of times people will come to us. They might either be starting out on a brand new issue, like they're trying to get something framed up in the right way, or they could come to us and say, hey, our issue doesn't really have the momentum. And maybe it used to, and we've just lost it, or maybe it just isn't building the momentum that it needs. And so they actually want us to come together and to look at it. So a great example was actually down in Louisiana and on the Gulf Coast. I was working with a number of the big environmental groups, and they really wanted to be doing some fairly large infrastructure projects down there to make sure that the whole area was protected from hurricanes. It's a huge port for us down there with the Mississippi River. They had a lot of things that they wanted to do for the environment. The environment's really been through the ringer down there. And we were trying to figure out where the federal funds were so we could run different campaigns aimed at different agencies. And it was funny because we were trying to get billions of dollars, and we had to go and figure out it's this in the Interior and this in the EPA and this in Commerce. And so we were adding up these numbers, and we were going to have to run like 10 campaigns. And suddenly the BP oil spill happened. And we all got together and we were like, oh my gosh, because first of all, we just spent 6 months planning. And now we have this huge crisis going on in the region. But actually, the groups were really smart. And we started looking at it and we realized that BP was going to have to pay a lot of money to the region because of this oil spill, like billions of dollars, the same billions we were looking for. And what we found out was up until that moment, a big oil spill like that actually meant that that money would just go into the US Treasury. And then Congress would just decide how to use it. And it doesn't necessarily go to the region. And that was the moment when we realized not only a program, but a communication idea was to put forth the Restore Act. And the Restore Act actually said that the fees would come back to the region. And more importantly, for these groups, the vast majority of the fees would actually go to environmental projects to improve the environment of the region. And because it was a lot of money coming down to that region, as you may know, the Gulf Coast is actually pretty red most of the time. We actually got all of the senators, for the most part, Texas being a small excuse to not do it, but everybody else came in on it. And we actually got the Restore Act into federal law. And so that was a huge, big deal for these environmental groups, for the whole region, for the environment. And it was all being open to not only a smart solution, but actually communicating it in a way that made a lot of sense, that the money should come back to the region that was most impacted by the spill. And so that's a really good example of communications and programming working together and getting something done that's super important in a fairly short period of time.
And who were you communicating with in that campaign?
Well, we had to start with the senators, who we knew were going to be a big play for us, that we needed them. And if you look at other regions like the Great Lakes and others, the region actually works quite well together. They do really well bringing federal investments to the region, and they use their political power in that way. But it hadn't been done before along the Gulf Coast region. And so we really had to be working and telling, like, Florida when it was in their interest, and Mississippi and why it was in their interest, and why they wanted to work together. And then had to work, of course, with the counterparts in different constituencies. And we had everybody from environmental groups who were definitely talking about if we would build these big wetlands, that it would help us with hurricanes, which of course causes a lot of economic distress to the area, down to places like Oxfam and people who are really looking for the jobs, oystermen, fishermen, a lot of people. Like, that oil is a big problem. It's a big problem to recreation fishing, to commercial fishing. So we started getting all these different constituencies, and we were communicating with them, engaging them, and having them work their own advocacy voice with their leaders. And so ultimately it became a very popular idea in the region by moving all of these different interests, everybody from Oxfam, who works for low-income people, and those people are most impacted when disasters happen to the region, all the way to the business interests, and getting them all at the same table, which is tricky, but powerful.
Just to give our viewers a feeling for the range of types of communication, do you have an example that more involved public communication, or was there a public communication component of this? Because you focused in on communicating with elected leaders.
Yeah. So a great public communication thing that we've been working on a lot is we really want to make sure that people who have already done their time in the criminal justice system, when they get out, many of them have been stripped of their civil rights. So they're not allowed to vote, and they have to go through these very intricate and biased clemency processes where they have to go to different governors of different states and beg to get their rights back. And that seems pretty not okay. And it actually really impacts what happens on the ground. Like, can you get hired for a job? In a lot of states, you can't even get a license in some cases to run a nail salon or other things if you have any form of conviction. So a lot of your future is actually really impacted by laws that are very biased, where you can live, what kind of rates you get for a loan. So this really impacts a lot of people, and it impacts their families. And as you probably know, there's a lot of people who've been impacted by the criminal justice system in the United States. So we actually worked down in Florida to get anybody who'd been formerly convicted. A really important amendment had gone through the state that said they could have their right back to vote. And so we were making sure that they could vote. And so we are working both with people who'd been convicted as well as their families. We call them returning citizens. And but also to all of the candidates and to all of the Get Out the Vote groups. So really a much bigger public play to try and get them to think about this is literally millions of people that could be brought into the voter rolls in Florida as we were able to successfully get them to vote. And they had a lot of reasons to vote. Lots of things were happening from their elected leaders that impacted their daily lives. So we did mass communication, everything from guiding the organizers who do the door knocking, and we actually raised $28 million from the public. A lot of them still have fines and fees, and there was a little bit of shenanigans at the Florida legislature around the amendment that said that they had to pay all their fines and fees. So we worked with people like John Legend, really well-known singers and actors, and the NBA got really involved, and we actually raised $28 million to clear a lot of people's fines and fees so that they could register to vote and have their voice at the polls. So that's an example of mass public communication that had to involve a lot of different people that we did in the 2020 cycle down in Florida.
Yeah, I was aware of the fee issue. I hadn't realized that money had been raised to just pay them. That's interesting. I didn't know.
Yeah, it was really interesting. So the Amendment 4 passed, and then the state legislature actually passed a law to clarify that all your fines and fees had to be paid. The organization that's behind this, the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, led by Desmond Meade, is super inspirational. They're constantly just trying to figure out how to take care of the returning citizens down there so they have full civil rights. And they did start to fight it in court, and they actually got first a really good court decision that actually said that this sounded a lot like, a poll tax. But then an appeals court actually said, no, Florida can do this. And we were in that election year, and people were excited to, think about politics last year. And so the group really just decided, we're just going to go raise some money and see if we can pay the fines and fees. And all the money raised from this group went to the fines and fees. It's a pretty amazing, inspirational story. In fact, Desmond just got the MacArthur Genius Grant, partially because of this work. So he's, it's a great organization. And I think a lot of people are out there right now. I mean, we're all hearing about all these voter laws on both sides. To make sure that people can vote, and then people are making sure there's no fraud. And wherever you sit on the aisle, that's, communications is going to help make that happen or not happen.
Great. So this is a little weird. We have a question from Brian. Brian, I don't think it's a problem, but we'll check into if there's any issues at the university. Okay. And so you should contact us offline. Just taking care of Brian there. Could maybe turning more to the class, could you take us through a little bit of just how you structure the class and, yeah.
Yeah. Well, as you said at the top, Michael, I think you brought me in. I'm a practitioner. I've been doing this work for over 25 years now. So our class is really a class where we discuss the current events that are going on. Like, it's better than any textbook I could grab that might talk about a campaign that happened 10 years ago, is that we're constantly surrounded with people trying to shape what we think and what we should do. So whether it's somebody telling us to have a boycott against a certain company, or whether someone's telling us to, not drive around in our cars, or trying to get us to support a policy, we're just constantly bombarded by this. And so the class really comes together, and we do two critical things together. We're going through each week, how do you actually plan an influence campaign? And in my case, influence is not a dirty word. It's actually motivating people, probably for their best interest and in the public interest. And so the students do two things. One is they pay attention to a campaign that they pick at the top of the year. They can pick any issue that they want to follow. It just has to be an active campaign. So if somebody wants to go see if someone's trying to preserve gun rights, or if somebody's trying to push gun control, they're welcome to pick what they want to pick, and they follow that campaign. And each week, as we talk about, well, what is a campaign win, or who are the audiences, and what do we know about engaging with them, and how to do so successfully, they're looking at that campaign and they're saying, well, this seems to be what they're doing. So we start the class by just having a big discussion with each other. What are we seeing out there? How are we seeing this campaign element play out? What do we think about it? Do we think it's good? Do we think it's bad? Do we think it's manipulative? Is it working? Maybe it's manipulative and working. And so, yesterday in class, we talked a lot about Facebook, just knowing that there's been a lot of things issued recently about how Facebook conducts their business model and whether they'll be regulated or not. And so we talked a lot about, if you had to protect Facebook and put messengers out there to talk about why Facebook's position is correct, that they're a neutral platform and, they're not responsible for hate speech. And we talked that through, and then we turned it around and we were like, okay, if you wanted to regulate the heck out of Facebook and change them completely and possibly break them up, now who are you deploying as messengers? So we get to have really good conversations and put our strategic thinking to work. They also work on a team project. So at the top of the semester, they get assigned a group, and that group decides to run their own campaign. And in that case, they get to be the creatives on it. They go and they talk to different people, either at the state or at the campus level or the federal level, and understand what's going on. And then they actually develop a strategy throughout the semester, and they present on it a few times to get feedback. And ultimately they put a campaign in, and then my co-teacher and I, Erin Hart, we decide whether or not that sounds like a smart campaign or not. And that is the grade.
So it's not pass fail. Smart or not, how smart it is.
That's right.
I'll reframe it. Speaking of which, actually, you used the word frame earlier. Could you just say where the concept of framing fits into how you think about this work?
Yeah, we talk a lot about this in class, and it's a really critical strategic decision is how you frame up a conversation that's going to be had in public, because of course it's upon what grounds that you shape it that then we decide what solution or what we're willing to do about it. So, as we've all been seeing around mask mandates, if it's framed up as what's in the public health, we might have different answers than people who are framing it up as freedom and having the freedom to do what you want to do. And so what grounds get solved for is a really critical decision. We're actually watching today on the Hill. Of course, big oil is there, and you've seen that the Democrats are actually kind of taking a page out of the playbook against big tobacco, and they're really focused on, when did they know that climate change was a problem? And you might sort of feel like why does that matter? But they're framing it up very strategically for themselves for what they want to do and how responsible or not big oil is for the current climate crisis that we're looking at. And of course, there's people who are proponents of fossil fuels who that's the exact wrong framing, and they actually don't want to be compared to big tobacco, and they don't really want this to be the conversation. They, of course, always want to talk about us having affordable energy, and they're going to talk about gas prices spiking, and they're going to try and frame it on that and having affordable energy in all of our homes and workplaces. And who wins that framing is actually ultimately probably who is going to put forward their solutions to it. And so it's a really important thing, and it's a constantly moving target, and people are constantly trying to capture the frame and define a conversation so that it's on the grounds that are most favorable to them.
Yeah, I still remember your story about the I think it was the San Francisco airport expansion and reframing it from saving the salamander to avoiding traffic congestion. Which was more
exactly.
No one cared about the salamander, but they didn't want to be stuck in traffic. So reframing it that way was, a key to success.
That's right.
What else was I going to ask? Oh, just trying to see if there's a question. Oh, I think someone's been searching you on the internet while we've been doing this, or they knew about it already. But it's just basically, can you talk about the SMART chart a little bit? What is that? I remember it. What are you on, version 90.3 at this point?
I'm actually only on 4.0. It does not get updated that often, but it did just get updated this summer to put equity at the heart of it. So the SMART chart is actually a way for any organization, nonprofit. This is actually what I trained Michael on many years ago. It is how to think through the way to have a strategic communication plan for something you're trying to get done. So back in the day when I got started, I really could see that communications was going to be something that any leader actually has to do all of the time. And so it's not like, oh, I can have this one person who just communicates. In fact, organizations communicate every day. Whether or not they're doing it well or not is up to how much thought they put into their strategy. So the SMART chart actually walks you through. It says, what's your goal and who's going to help you achieve that goal? That's your decision maker. And what's going on in the world that's both helpful to you, like it's going to give you a step forward, and what's coming at you that's actually going to cause challenges when you're trying to communicate about this. And then you can think about your audiences and who they are. And a big part of that is not just thinking about them demographically, which is like, who are you? Like, I'm a female, Michael's male, but also psychographically, like actually, what are my attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors? And that's going to actually tell you a lot more about how I'm going to be to an issue, or whether or not you can motivate me to do something. And then it helps you to think about messaging. What are you going to say to me? Messenger, who's going to say it that's going to be credible and trustworthy by me if I'm your audience? And then tactically, how do you actually communicate? Through what forms are you going to do? So this really helps groups not come to me and say, I want to do a TikTok video. And maybe a TikTok video is totally the right thing to do, but you got to back up and put the strategy in place and know that, oh, that's going to really appeal to my audience, and that's going to be something that motivates them. So super important to actually think through strategy. And we put the SMART chart out because we want anybody in the public interest space to actually know how to do it. And it's kind of how I feel about the students too. Like, again, they have big ambitions about change in the world. And it feels good to know that when they finish the class, they know how to run a persuasion campaign. Like, they can literally go run it that day. And some of them do and take jobs right away.
We had a question about the class and whether it also covers communications in response to crises, challenges, protests.
Yeah, we actually, we do deal with opposition and talk through how to strategically both anticipate it and then also to think about what happens. And then, of course, we talk about it in tracking, because every week people come and say what's happening in their campaigns. And sometimes their campaigns are either under attack or attacking themselves. And, to really understand what's the strategic use of this, and does that change what the communication strategy might be? So we definitely dive into that.
Yeah, and there's another communications class that we have that I know does a fair amount of that as well. So
very important.
A lot of the nuts and bolts on that stuff. I don't think we have any other questions right now. Let me check. What kind of spread out here? I don't think so. Is there anything else you wanted to add, Kristen, about teaching the class or anything else?
No, I would just say that I do think that the students get a lot out of just it being very practical and hands-on, and it's a skill that they actually use. So whether it's learning how to do really good presentations, which we teach during the class, to really being able to come up, do good analysis and come up with a strategy that they'd be willing to try, is something that, puts them in good stead for a lot of different things they might do in their career. So I think whether or not you're actually trying to go into communications or not, it's giving you a lot of skills that are going to make a difference in a professional environment.
Yeah, we've had students who didn't know they wanted to do communications until they took your class, and now ended up doing it. But students get a lot out of your class.
I think you're getting a question more about the MCP internship.
Yes, I am. Sorry, I have to read these. Okay. So first of all, I'm being reminded to tell everybody that you're going to get a recording of this webinar and contact information for the academics team if you have any, nuts and bolts questions. We do have in the MPP, there's a question about the MPP Masters in Public Policy fellowships and internships. They're two different things. So we do have some fellowships, which are basically paying work at UNH, working with faculty members during the school year. But there's also one of the requirements for graduation is to do an internship. We waive it for people who have substantial experience in the field or were currently working in the field, but we have an internship requirement, and it's, we think it's really important in the context of the program for students to, sort of go out there, start applying this, in mid-program about start applying their skills that they're learning, and then kind of bring that back to the classroom, and sort of, so you can it's iterative. You learn it, you do it, you learn it. Couple other quick questions. I know Kristen has to go, so if you need to jump, these are questions for me mainly about the program. One question is about the Washington, D.C. colloquium. Hi, Kristen. Thank you very much for doing this.
Of course.
She's very busy. So yeah, there's a question about the DC colloquium, where we take students down to Washington during the January term for a week. And I'm in the middle of planning it now, actually. And, basically we do 25 meetings with people across kind of all the different jobs people do in Washington. So we meet with, agency heads, people who work at the White House. We hopefully we'll get to meet in the White House this year. It's a little unclear because of COVID, but we have meetings with White House officials, but also people who work in the advocacy community, people who work in communications firms, political, media consultants, think tanks, advocacy groups. We've gone to the Pentagon, we've gone to foreign embassies to understand, what different what the German embassy does in Washington and how it integrates with the policies, with the policy world of Washington. So it's it's a pretty intensive. It's a lot of meetings in a short time, but people seem to get a lot out of it, and it's not everybody in the program wants to end up in Washington, but the nice thing about it is it's the biggest in the United States. It's obviously the tightest concentration of people working in the business, if you will. And so it's a great opportunity to meet with everybody from, the ACLU and advocates to the Cato Institute, to tax lobbyists, to political consultants, to people who work in government at the highest levels. So that's what we do on that trip. And I see Nick put a link in the chat, so any of you who want to learn more about that can follow that link. All right, I think we're in good shape. I think we're at our allotted time, so that all worked out well. So thanks for joining us. Again, you can look on the website if you want more information on the programs. Thank you for the questions, and hope to see you again sometime. Bye.